advocate, you need to develop a thick skin. Because if every time somebody criticizes a point of view, a part of your life, you lose your shit, unfortunately, you're not just somebody who got angry during a debate. No, you're a mentally ill person who doesn't know how to behave in public. Don't fall into the stereotype. If you have a bipolar diagnosis and you start yelling in public, it will be seen as a symptom of bipolar disorder, and all of your competition will immediately say, see, this is why we shouldn't have invited them. Nobody will see it for what it is.
You're listening to Inside Bipolar, a Healthline Media podcast, where we tackle bipolar disorder using real-world examples and the latest research.
Hey everybody, welcome to the podcast. My name is Gabe Howard, and I live with bipolar disorder.
And I'm Dr. Nicole Washington, a board-certified psychiatrist.
And we continue to get your emails. If you have ideas for the shows, topics, suggestions, things you want us to cover, things you want us to stop doing, grows, glows, anything in between, hit us up at show@psychcentral.com. That's show@psychcentral.com. We love to get your email. And one of the emails that we get often is, how do I become an advocate? How do I become a mental health advocate, a bipolar advocate? Some get very specific, blogger, speaker, podcaster, etc. But they all surround this idea of, how do I move the needle to help people like myself living with bipolar disorder or a loved one have better outcomes in society. So today's episode is all about bipolar advocacy.
I love it. I think that when you live with an illness like bipolar disorder, learning how to be an advocate for yourself, whether it be with your support system, whether it be with your mental health team, whether it be with your insurance company, maybe you take it as far as legislators and people who make the laws, but on whatever level you're advocating, I think it is an important skill to have.
And you definitely opened up a can of worms there. Advocacy is one of those words that can mean so many things, right? Petitioning the federal government to expand Medicaid so that people with mental illness who don't have health insurance can get access to Dr. Nicole's is absolutely advocacy. But it's also advocacy to advocate with your friends, family members, or loved ones to say, hey, every time you walk into my house and you immediately ask me if I've taken my pills or how my bipolar is or how I'm doing in the head, I want to advocate for myself because I don't want my whole life to be you questioning my mental health. That is also advocacy. So we have a lot to cover because everything in between is also advocacy.
Let's start with those loved ones. But seriously, people have really asked you how you are in the head. Is that a real question that people have really said to you?
Oh my God, yes. Yes, absolutely. Now, I do want to be a little fair. Gallows humor is a reasonable way to deal with trauma, etc. So when people are uncomfortable, they often resort to humor. So they think they're being funny. Now, in fairness, I like dark humor. I like gallows humor. Sometimes they are being funny, but it does rub, right? It does rub after a while. The real thing that I want people to focus on is, I swear to God, if every single time you walk into my house or I walk into your house or we meet for a movie and you're like, hey, sad clown, how you doing mentally? I don't really care what words you use. Like, I want you to ask me about a concert I went to or a movie I saw or the activity we're doing or my favorite television shows. If the very first words out of your mouth are constantly some sort of, how is your bipolar disorder doing? Like, a lot of people with bipolar disorder report that all the time. They're just so sick of hearing it.
And it is one of those low-hanging fruit situations where I think people want to speak up for themselves, but there is the fear of speaking up for yourself and alienating yourself from the people you love, or you just don't want to start World War III because as soon as you start to advocate for yourself, you worry that the individual on the other end is going to blow up at you. There's a lot of reasons people don't advocate for themselves. And I think starting with the people that we're closest to is great. Because I do think that if you can't advocate with those people, you likely aren't going to advocate with your doctor. You're not going to feel comfortable enough advocating for yourself with your insurance company. You sure as heck aren't going to volunteer to go down to the capital of your state and advocate with legislators. So I think this is a good place to start, is with that inner circle.
It's an excellent place to start because it also has really high stakes. Being able to self advocate with the people who you spend the most time with and set those boundaries is really important. So these are solid advocacy skills. And here's why they're solid advocacy skills. Because if you lose your ever loving mind trying to get what you want from your friends and family and loved ones, how are you ever going to press back against the government? Right, against politicians, against health insurance companies and other bureaucracy. If you can't even have a reasonable conversation explaining your needs, wants, desires, and viewpoints to the people who you love the most in the world, good luck going up against a bureaucrat. Good luck going up against a lawyer or a health insurance company, or I mean oh, I just want to do like that southern thing where you pat people on the head and say bless your little heart.
Bless your
Right? You
heart.
can't even talk to your mom about your needs with bipolar disorder. But yeah, you're going to take on the $1 billion health insurance industrial complex. Sure you are. So I think that's a good lesson, and I really want to anchor that conversation there.
Okay. So how do you advocate for yourself with your loved ones? And especially thinking back to younger Gabe, newly diagnosed Gabe, really trying to figure things out, Gabe. How did you advocate for yourself, or how did you learn to advocate for yourself with your family?
Oh, I learned to advocate by screwing everything up. Right. I want to be like really, really honest here. Like I yelled at everybody. I thought that advocacy was like fire and brimstone. I really thought that advocacy was a made for TV movie with the lawyer yelling and pounding the podium and the great big protest marches with all the flags and
Yeah.
and and that does fit in very occasionally. I'm not saying that there's never been a good protest or a good podium, pound, right? But most advocacy is boring. Most advocacy is what I like to call enlightening people to our way of thinking. It's saying, I have heard you. I am validating what you're saying. I can see that you are very frustrated with the situation. But now, if you could just take a moment to see things from my point of view. I always point out to family members, friends, caregivers, loved ones, coworkers, the people in our lives, if you are frustrated watching it, imagine how frustrated I am dealing with it. That seems to level the playing field immediately because they immediately start to think, okay, you're right. I am really frustrated with Gabe's behavior. I am really frustrated with what is happening because of bipolar disorder. So Gabe must be frustrated by that as well and has to contend with the symptoms of bipolar disorder at the same time. But the part that I want people to focus on is giving them that piece of information in a non-accusatory, professional, kind way, I believe moves the needle. It moves the needle and gets you closer to advocacy. Now, yelling is more fun. I do want to say that to all the people listening. Yelling and screaming and throwing a fit, like that feels really good in the moment, but it doesn't work.
It doesn't work, and it doesn't do anything for those relationships. I mean, we're talking about people that you are actually in relationship with, the people that you love, the people that love you back. The yelling, the inciting war does not help your long-term relationship with that person.
Exactly. Now, when we move away from our family members, right? Remember, this was just practice, right? We first sang in the shower and we let our friends and family hear us, and they said we were good, and then we moved to karaoke. The next advocacy that I want to talk about would be like your lower level. It's advocating, in my mind, with your health insurance companies, your businesses, your Dr. Nicole's. It's the whole stigma reduction, which is much bigger, right? It's much bigger than, mom, dad, brother, sister, bestie, right? But it still has real world consequences because if you're not advocating for yourself with your medical people or your health insurance companies, then what are you doing? You're just blindly following whatever they say. That's no way to live.
You know what, though, Gabe? There's a fine line between advocating for yourself and not blindly following somebody and being antagonistic and not necessarily advocating. And I think a lot of people feel like they're advocating for themselves with their healthcare team. But on the other end of that, it just feels wildly antagonistic. So that I think we have to talk about how do you successfully advocate for yourself in that setting without it being wildly antagonistic?
One of the things that I think about is my younger years, right? When I used to yell at mom and dad would stay my mom and dad. When I yelled at a boss, I suddenly didn't have that boss anymore because I got fired. And we do
Yes.
need to understand the rules of engagement. And one thing that I want to be very clear with advocacy is, I really think that made for TV movies have ruined a whole crop of advocates. And in many ways, I think that social media has ruined an entire crop of advocates
Yeah.
because this yelling and screaming and smarmy and sarcasm and aggressive behavior, it
Yeah.
gets a lot of views,
It
but it
does.
doesn't change any minds. It doesn't actually advocate, it just creates content.
Yes.
It's great for television shows, it's great for movies, it's great for plays, but as far as actually changing things, making things better for you or others, it does nothing to move the needle. So the rules of engagement here are not fire and brimstone, right? If that's the kind of advocate you want to be, you can do it, but you are not going to have success. I really listen, Dr. Nicole, I'm loud.
What?
I know.
What? Oh my God. Oh my God.
I know. I know.
I had no idea.
I am a 6'3", 200-pound, loud, redheaded man. And I've been doing this for 20 years. If
Okay.
yelling, screaming, and being sarcastic worked, oh, we wouldn't need this episode because this problem be resolved.
I mean, you would be expert level. I'm not gonna lie. Not
Yeah,
gonna lie. You
it doesn't work. What
no.
works is preparation,
Yes.
understanding what you want, understanding what you need, and articulating it in a way that is reasonable. And honestly, I get so much negative feedback when I say this, but compromising, and it's hard to compromise because people are like, "You want me to compromise my rights?" Yeah, I want you to take a short-term perspective for long-term gains. So when you talk about, not coming in too hot with like your Dr. Nicole or your healthcare company, right? So, you pick up the phone and you state your case. You've got your documentation. You remain professional. You write down the names of the people who you're talking to. You say to your Dr. Nicole or your doctor's office or whatever, I don't accept this. This is not okay. And here is why. So you're firm, which unfortunately for people with bipolar disorder, you have to admit, sometimes being firm is seen as aggression or as a precursor to violence, but you're just being firm. So unfortunately, my folks with bipolar, you've also got to be aware of that. Don't stand up and raise your voice and say to Dr. Nicole, I'm not going to tolerate this. I'm setting a hard boundary that you're not doing this, and like wave your finger in her face.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, because that'll get you terminated from somebody's care. And
Exactly.
we all know, if you find somebody that you feel like you connect well with, we don't want to do anything that is going to get me terminated from services, because think about being on the other end of that, and you may just feel like you were being very passionate about a particular topic. But if I'm on the other end of that and you think, okay, so Gabe said he's a, 6'3", 200 and something
Yeah.
pound, loud redhead. And if he gets super passionate about something and he stands up and he's like, you aren't listening to me, and he is strongly and loudly and passionately and aggressively advocating for himself, I'm on the other end of that. And I'm also a person. And you know what? I'm 5'3". I'm not going to tell you how much I weigh, but I'm 5'3". I'm 5'3". And that is going to feel very intimidating or threatening. And when I feel that way in a clinical setting, we lose our ability to be able to work together. That's not what you want to happen. So definitely calm and figuring out, how do I get the points across that I'm most passionate about without losing my cool. And that's not a skill set that some folks have. I mean, it's not a natural skill set. And so I do think it is something that you practice, and maybe practicing with family is the best way to start off, is to practice with those who are closest to you. But in that healthcare setting, because we live in a time where healthcare workers are going through it and feeling unsafe in their workplaces because of things that have happened in the world, And you may be the kind of person who wouldn't hurt a fly, but in that moment when you are being physically worked up by whatever it is that's going on, the person on the other end doesn't know that necessarily, and they may not be able to take the risk and take the chance that you wouldn't hurt a fly. They may not know that or know you well enough to know that. So I do think working on the calm piece is really, really number one and important, because once you start yelling, nobody hears a word that you say.
One of the things that I keep in mind, like you just articulated, Dr. Nicole, is you don't know what's coming for me, especially since I have a mental illness. And there's also this stigma that people with mental illness are unpredictable, and that could lead to violence. We also need to be aware of that. So, for example, whenever I advocate, no matter how passionate I am, I make sure to practice the quote unquote anger, resentment, frustration out, right? By practicing in the mirror, by using my points over and over again, by venting to other people who know me and don't care that I get all angry, etc. And then I tone that way down. I also make sure to do things like stand far across the room, or make sure there's like a desk in between me and the Dr. Nicole, right? I sit down and I stay seated. I watch my mannerisms. I don't point at people, right? I know that we kind of get into the, and another thing, and it's just really not fair that you did the following three things. And, you didn't even ask me, right? You can hear the passion in my voice. And then that finger starts wagging. And then the person's like, uh-oh, I need to be careful here. So what I really firmly believe in is just the calm, rational approach. And the next thing I want to say to that calm, rational approach is, we've been talking about having a conversation with our Dr. Nicole's or with our health insurance. But there are so many other ways to advocate that I don't think get a fair look, like the email, or like writing the email. Dear Dr. Nicole, the following things happened and I wanted to make you aware of it. And the specific advocacy point that I want to address there is so many people fire off the email on their phone while they're pissed off. Once again, not the greatest advocacy. Write it, edit it, have some other people look at it, stick to the facts, write a professional, reasonable letter, email stating your case, and then send that off to the powers that be. It also creates documentation, which is great for advocacy.
Yeah, absolutely. And advocacy can be small or large when it comes to your healthcare team that you're advocating for. You could simply be advocating that they give you an appointment around a certain time of day. Your advocacy might be medication related. You may need to say to your Dr. Nicole, I'm open to discussing something new. I'm open to discussing a change, but these are the things that I really hope to avoid with medication. And you list those things out for them. And then you can have a better, more informed conversation with them about the changes. It could be something really big, Gabe, like I need to change my doctor or I need to change my therapist because this thing happened. And now my therapeutic bond with this person is altered in a way that I just don't think I'm going to be able to get what I need. It may be big like that. But either way, going through the steps of making sure it's calm when you present it, making sure it's very clear about what it is that you're asking for and what the problem is, and then being open to the idea that maybe there's an alternate option to what it is that you're asking for. I think those three things are going to be like the keys to you advocating for yourself with your healthcare providers.
I want to switch gears, Dr. Nicole, because I really know that the vast majority of the people emailing us asking about advocacy are really saying, how do we change how people in America view people living with bipolar disorder? Right. They're not asking how to advocate with their doctors or their health insurance company or even their families. I believe that they're like Legos. They all fit together. This is good foundational knowledge. That's why we discussed it. You need to have this information. It's super important. But people really want to know how to make life better for people with bipolar disorder. And I believe this because whenever there is a national news story, about an act of violence or something, and the whole world is speculating on the mental health status of the perpetrator, and people with bipolar disorder get swept up in that because people are kind of giving them the side eye, like, could that have been you? Makes you feel a certain way. That's when our emails tick up. That's when these emails start coming in. That's when people want to become advocates. And Dr. Nicole, there's a lot to unpack there. So first, listen to everything that we just said. If you think that screaming at a politician is going to work, yeah, they scream at each other. I just they literally call each other names on the record, on the Senate floor, on the campaign trail. I mean, just we
Yeah.
live in a society where just politicians are screaming and yelling and acting a
Yeah.
fool constantly, and we elect them. So if you thought that yelling was going to do anything, just
Yeah.
come on. As much as I hate to say it, I kind of table this in my own mind, Dr. Nicole, as I'm sort of being an ambassador for people with bipolar disorder and showing America a different way. And people are
Okay.
very familiar with my advocacy because they're listening to this show. They're very familiar with Dr. Nicole's advocacy because they're listening to this show. And the thing that you'll notice about Dr. Nicole and I is, but we're pretty polite to each other. We're pretty
We are pretty
professional.
polite.
Yeah, even when we disagree, we validate each other's side and say, well, what about that? And Dr. Nicole and I don't agree on everything.
No, 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 no. We don't agree. But we have yet to have a fight about anything because we're just a little bit different. Probably a lot different. But we're able to be different, and we're not having like celebrity death match in here. We're not having podcast death match.
That'd be awesome, though. Like if we were claymation,
If we were claymation.
that would be so great.
Yeah, we should get someone to do that for us.
Yeah, I mean, it is more difficult because Dr. Nicole and I aren't polar opposites, or we wouldn't be a good podcasting team. But we are on opposite sides of this debate. For the purpose of this podcast, Dr. Nicole is very medical model, and Gabe is very lived experience, and those
Yeah.
clash. But you'll notice that when they clash, Dr. Nicole and I let each other speak, and we have changed each other's minds sometimes. And
Yeah.
sometimes we've just agreed to disagree, and we've had to compromise and move on. And I think that's important. I want to backtrack on this opposite sides a little bit. I mean, we really are on the same side. We just have opposite vantage points, right?
Yes.
Like we're both watching Niagara Falls, but I'm watching it from the American side and you're watching it from the Canadian side, and we're both looking at the same thing, but our vantage point is just different enough. And we're back discussing advocacy and bipolar disorder.
Yeah. The point being that you can have different opinions from someone and still be able to advocate for yourself and still be able to get your point across without any disrespect and just without raising flags and emotions, because there are times when we need to be able to communicate without all of the emotion and all that comes with that. And when you're trying to advocate for yourself on a larger scale, it is more important. And I love that you said, Gabe, that you almost treat yourself as if you're an ambassador for the illness. You are an ambassador for bipolar disorder. And I like that. I do think that comes with some pressure, though, of I have to represent everything this individual knows about bipolar disorder and I can't screw it up. And so I don't want you to put that kind of pressure on yourself, but I do like the idea of being an ambassador for the illness. It sounds very fancy. It sounds very formal, but it is true, because there are going to be people, especially when you start advocating with your legislators or some of these larger groups, there are going to be people who walk into an encounter with you having one very stigma-filled view or idea of what a person living with bipolar disorder is like. You have the ability to absolutely have that person walk away saying, huh, or at least questioning if what they thought was 100% accurate. Because I can guarantee you, if you're calm and clear and concise and you make your point across and you share your story, it is probably not what they're expecting to happen, and they're going to be surprised.
I love pulling the rug out from under people, and I look
Me
for
too.
those moments in my advocacy. I do a keynote called This Bipolar Life, and one of the things that I start off with when they introduce me is, Gabe Howard, bipolar disorder. Now they know that I'm on the stage, they know that I have the accolades, they've seen some of my awards, and they know that I work, and they usually know I'm married. So they're already starting to hedge their bet to, well, Gabe must be high functioning bipolar, and but. Moving that aside, what I do is I get out there and I always tell the story of how my mother tells people, hey, what's Gabe do for a living? Oh, he's a podcaster, but one that makes money, one that makes money. he's a professional speaker and advocate. Like that is his day job. He owns his own company and it's successful. And I always tell that joke because it does two things. One, it's funny. My mom's looking out for me. Right. My mom wants people to know that her son with bipolar disorder is successful and he's not living in her basement. But two, they all thought that. On
Yeah.
one hand, they're all thinking, oh, why did Gabe's mom say that? But yeah, they all thought I had a day job too. They all thought I was doing this on the side. None of these people thought this was my full-time job. And then I start disabusing them of other notions that they have. Like, I'm not living off family money. I don't have a trust fund. My wife doesn't support me. I don't have a caregiver. I'm my own person. Right. And I start chiseling away at those things. Now, that's my personal story. You have to find those moments in your personal story because then you're sticking to what you know best. I do feel that a large part of advocacy is just showing people something different than what the pop culture and media representation of bipolar disorder is. Because let's face it, we don't need to tell them about crisis. We don't need to tell them about the bad part. The media is going to do that job for us. We need to tell them how Gabe Howard, at his core, is a boring middle-aged guy who lives in the suburbs, who runs errands for his wife and forgets to pick up the dry cleaning. You need to show them how people living with bipolar disorder are just like everybody else.
Yes. But Gabe, you may not always talk about the worst parts of your illness and the things that you feel like bipolar disorder has taken from you, or the struggles that you've had as a result of living with bipolar disorder. But there may be times when it is appropriate to tell that story. And so one of the things I definitely encourage people to do is, if you feel like you are ready to jump into advocacy and you really, really want to make change on a larger scale, I want to make sure you feel really good in your bipolar disorder. I want to make sure that you're as stable as you can be, because having to rehash so much of that and having to retell those stories over and over can be really, really stressful for you. And I think it's important to make sure that you have the right team in place to support you as you're becoming that advocate that you want to be.
Are you telling me that advocacy is hard? I thought it was really easy. You know what? I want to go there, Dr. Nicole. If you want to be an advocate, you need to develop a thick skin.
Yeah.
Because if every time somebody criticizes a point of view, a part of your life or something you went through, you lose your shit. Unfortunately, if you are an advocate with bipolar, you're not just somebody who got mad at a colleague. You're not somebody who got angry during a
Yeah.
debate. No, you're a mentally ill person who doesn't know how to behave in public.
Yeah.
Don't fall into the stereotype. Listen, you may not like it, but it's true. If you have a bipolar diagnosis and you want to be a bipolar advocate and you start yelling in public, it will be seen as a symptom of bipolar disorder, and all of your competition will immediately say, see, this
Yep.
is why we can't give them rights. See,
Yep.
this is why
Yep.
they can't be on boards. See, this is why we shouldn't have invited them. Nobody will see it for what it is, which is, oh my God, did you really just say that? And let me tell you, Dr. Nicole, I've heard some things.
Yeah.
I, I, I have heard some things. The number of people right now, just right now today, this isn't a story from 10 years ago. This isn't a story from 15 years ago. Right now, today, this is an
Okay.
up-to-date story, who ask me how often my mom checks on me, or ask me, well, how did you get your wife to be your caregiver? Or ask me, what services do I get from other, systems or people in order to live alone? And I'm like, why do you believe that every single person with bipolar disorder has that? Some people need that, and that's fair and that's
Yeah.
relevant and that's
Yeah.
important. But for
Absolutely.
you to make the base assumption that every single person with bipolar disorder needs an extremely high level of care and cannot survive on their own is deeply, deeply hurtful to people living with bipolar disorder. And it also removes hope from anyone who's struggling. I want to be very, very fair here, Dr. Nicole. There was a point in my life where people were checking on me every day. But if I would have believed that I needed that for the rest of my life, they'd still be checking on me. So I am glad that there were as many advocates out there who were like, no, I'm married. I own my own house. I have my own children. I have my own job. And I thought to myself, okay, I need crutches and a cast on my leg right now, but the cast and the crutches can come off in the future. That hits very differently than you need a cast and crutches on your broken leg for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And I think that that's an excellent advocacy point that I want everybody to start with right now.
Yeah, no, that is excellent. Another thing, as I think about this large scale advocacy, I think there's strength in numbers. So figure out who is doing the advocacy in your area. Who is it? Who's the group? Who's the person? That's who you should lean on, because this is not easy work to get into. People who have done it can give you tips and tricks on how to manage things when they come up. It can just be very overwhelming the first times that you say, you know what, I'm going to make a change. I'm going to jump in. I'm going to go to my city council meeting. I'm going to go to my whatever meeting you're going to go to and try to advocate for something. That can just be so much more overwhelming than you think it's going to be. That I think figuring out who in town is doing the work and joining up with them, because sometimes they may even have classes to help you learn how to advocate for yourself. And that would be amazing as you enter this world.
I really think about Gabe Howard's early advocacy days. I didn't start off with a podcast in Healthline Media. I've been doing this for 20 years. And my very first advocacy work was literally participating in a fundraiser for a national nonprofit. They did a mental health walk. And the very first year that I participated, my advocacy was literally showing up. I showed up in public, was standing in a park with just a few hundred other people, and all of the banners were like, look, we have mental illness. We love people with mental illness. We support mental health. And I was there and I was counted. That is national advocacy and is so super important. And then the next year, I wore a shirt that I think it said, I live with bipolar disorder. I forget exactly. We made special shirts because I put together a team and I raised a bunch of money. I was actually the number one team that year. And I was really proud of myself. We raised a ton of money. And that's also advocacy, because for the first time, this organization crowned a team captain winner who lived with mental illness.
Wow.
Usually it was a friend or family member who captained it. It was always these families. And
yeah,
I realized really early on that I was like, wow, all I did was the same thing that everybody else did. But here's the magic. All of the sudden, all of those same people were like, wait, that's not mom and dad. That's not grandma and grandpa. That's not brother or sister. That's not aunt or uncle. That guy who lives with bipolar disorder raised the most amount of money for any team captain. That was a huge advocacy moment. It was an advocacy moment on the day at the park at the walk. They obviously put it in their newsletter. And then the next year, more people with mental illness cropped up. They came to it. They heard about it. And they're like, well, if he can do it, I can do it. And I really quickly learned that part of advocacy is it's really hard to be the first one. There's a joke, Dr. Nicole, that I always really like. And you and I grew up around the same era, and your mom is like, well, if all your friends jumped off of a cliff, would you? And the best joke that I ever heard is, well, I wouldn't go first, but yeah, if all of my friends jumped off a cliff and they landed safely and they looked happy and I saw how they did it and they were all having fun, yes, I would jump off the cliff. And on one hand, it was played up for humor, but I got to thinking about it. Do you know how many people with bipolar disorder are afraid to do things because the whole world is telling them that it's dangerous, that they will fail, that they can't? But the minute they see other people with bipolar disorder do it, then suddenly it goes back to that joke. Well, yeah, I would jump off a cliff if all my friends were doing it. And especially if I could yell down and say, hey, what do I do? How do I do this safely? You look like you're having fun. They're like, hey, it's no problem. You just get a running start and make sure you get out over that jagged rock ledge. You can only get so much out of this analogy, Dr. Nicole.
That sounds terrible. I still wouldn't jump.
But
personally, I still wouldn't jump. But anyway,
you get the point. You understand.
I do get the point. I get the point. I do get the point.
This is advocacy.
I get the point. And I like this idea of almost silent advocacy. So, two things that came to mind when you were telling that story is one, everybody's advocacy is not, at least initially, and maybe never, going to be the out loud, let me tell everybody about all my stuff. It may be as simple as you showing up at the kids' PTA event with a t-shirt that says, I live with bipolar disorder. That may be your advocacy. Your advocacy may be just showing people that I'm just a regular, boring person, and I come to my kids' events and struggle through them just like every other parent. That may be your advocacy. But your advocacy may also be stepwise. Like you said, the first year, you may not wear a shirt that says that. You may start with just something in general. You may arrange something at the kids' schools where you do some kind of campaign or something very silently, very quietly. You build up. It doesn't always have to be out in your face. It can be on whatever level you want it to be. It can progress at your pace of comfort, not necessarily somebody else's.
But go ahead and extrapolate that out. You don't have to disclose all of the gory details of your life with bipolar disorder in order to support a political agenda that believes in mental health. To write your congressperson and say, I want to make sure there is robust care, or to hear about a clubhouse or a group home or a health insurance policy that you feel is adverse to your life and the life of other people with bipolar disorder, you can participate in that just as a concerned citizen. Do I think it has more umph if you tell your story? Absolutely. But more umph, I think it has more umph if you have a scoop of ice cream with your apple pie. That doesn't mean that you can't just eat apple pie. People believe you got to do grandiose things in advocacy in order to be effective, but small things move mountains.
Oh, absolutely. Small things move mountains. I agree with that 100%. There is no one size fits all way to do advocacy. I think that it can be done in a lot of different ways.
I also want to address fundraising. People don't look at fundraising and advocacy, and I think they're absolutely wrong. These nonprofits need money to survive. So even if the only level you have is to write a check to a nonprofit who has a mental health initiative, support a local clubhouse, donate to a fund to help people with mental illness and bipolar disorder who can't afford health care, I think that has incredible amounts of advocacy. I also want to just touch on basic volunteerism. I got my start just helping out at a walk. And I think my first job ever was to direct traffic. I was a big guy. I was easy to see, and I'm really animated and I'm loud. So park over there, walk that way. This was a good job for Gigantic Gabe, but that helped the event. That helped
Yes.
the event.
Right. And even if you look at yourself and you can't see how you fit into the space, just show up. You'll figure out how you fit into the space. I am sure there are certain roles that Gabe would not be very well equipped for because of him being a 6'3", very loud man. But there are also roles that I couldn't fill. I'd be terrible at parking because I'm literally not going to be animated. People wouldn't even see me. They'd be like, hey, why is that lady standing in the middle of the road and we're trying to park? They just would miss it altogether. So we all have to figure out where we fit and what that looks like. And you won't know what that is until you show up.
And Dr. Nicole, I know we're nearing the end of our time together, but I really want to discuss failure in advocacy real quick. I think it's a good place to end. Here's the truth. Much of your advocacy will fail. It really will. But it will fail in its stated goal, right? Especially the big advocacy things, trying to move politicians, trying to get funding, trying to move the government, trying to reduce stigma. These advocacy efforts largely fail. That is just the reality of it. But they're worth doing for two reasons. One, every now and again, one works. We got 988 in many states across America. We got Medicaid expansion, which covers people with mental illness and addiction issues that don't have health insurance and got them into care, right? We have saved clubhouses and peer centers and drop-in centers and services for the homeless. So advocacy does work, but it fails a lot. And
Yeah.
so many people focus on well, that levy failed, that initiative failed, that sit-in failed, that we still have high suicide rates, et cetera. It's really easy to get bogged down in that. But sincerely, these failed initiatives are very public. They're very public. And the people who believe in them, those numbers grow. I do believe that we need a large number of failed initiatives so that people can start saying, why do we keep saying no to this? I'm going to join them next time, because I notice on a lot of these initiatives that in my state, Ohio, that we've worked on for years, I remember 20 years ago, there was 20 people in the room and the initiative failed. And then 5 years later, there's 1,000 people in the room and the initiative failed. And then 10 years later, there's 10,000 people in the room and the initiative failed. And then suddenly something happens and there's 100,000 people in the room. And the thing that we have been saying for a decade suddenly shines through and it passes.
Right.
You can't remove the failures from the success.
And you're right. It's not the time to quit, because it's very rare that your first time jumping into this that you will be successful. But it is important to also think about the positives that came out of it. If you're growing in numbers for a cause, if you're building community, you can absolutely meet people who are going to be side by side with you in this advocacy fight for years ahead. And that community is huge as you fight for this. And as you live with your illness, you start to learn people's personal stories. You start to share more of yourself with other people who are dealing with similar issues. I think there's no loss in that aspect of the advocacy. And I definitely encourage you to focus on the positives, however small they may be.
And they are out there, and build your tribe and rely on these people and just keep moving forward. Dr. Nicole, the number one thing that worries me about the state of advocacy is just how many people believe that if they don't have a big success, they have failed. And I include myself in this number. I get so bogged down in I'm not doing enough. This isn't going fast enough. I haven't fixed this. Why can't we do this? And it's always somebody, and by somebody, I usually mean Lisa. She is often the voice of reason. Our long-suffering producer has also been my partner in this for 20 years. She will show me things, and she's like, Gabe, you're right. The numbers have not changed significantly. However, the number of people talking about it has. The number of people working on it has. The amount of money that we're investing in it has. The number of resources available has. She points out things to me all the time. Like when I got started 20 years ago, I had to explain what bipolar disorder was. I would say, my name is Gabe Howard and I live with bipolar disorder, and bipolar disorder is defined as. It was just part of my speech. Well, in the last 5 years, I've dropped that. I don't need to. The audience falls asleep. Hi, my name is Gabe. I live with bipolar disorder. And they're like, okay, we know what that is. We have heard of it and we have a basic understanding. That is a sea change. Now, yes, I want more, but I'm also really proud of the fact that, Gen Z, they know what mental health is. They know what mental illness is. They are talking about this with their friends and family and peers, and they are okay recommending therapists to each other, recommending psychologists to each other, and openly discussing their needs to make sure that they feel seen and validated in the world. That is a huge victory.
But we do need people to continue to advocate, because it can be tiring. It can be exhausting. So having a lot of bodies in this fight is going to be what helps sustain the people who are fighting. So absolutely jump in there. We always need new ideas. I think advocacy efforts are fueled by new blood. We need the new people with the new vantage points and people who don't know the system as well. We need people at every stage involved. So yes, join us.
Absolutely. If you have any advocacy ideas or show topic ideas or hints or tips or even complaints, hit us up at show@psychcentral.com. We love getting your emails. You can also email the Depression and Bipolar Support Alliance, DBSA, or Mental Health America, or NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, All three of those groups are national advocacy groups who are always looking for volunteers. My personal favorite is the DBSA, the Depression and Bipolar Support Alliance. I really, really love them, but all three of those groups are good groups to get involved with for various reasons, and I highly recommend it. All right, everybody, we need some favors from you. First, wherever you downloaded this episode, please follow or subscribe to the show. It is absolutely free and you don't want to miss a thing. And listen, we need you to recommend the show. Share your favorite episodes on social media. Leave us a review. Bring us up in support groups. Send somebody an email or a text message. Recommending the Inside Bipolar podcast to the people you know is how we're going to grow. My name is Gabe Howard, and I wrote a book. It's called Mental Illness is an Asshole and Other Observations. You can get it on Amazon, but you want to go to my website and get a signed copy, and I'll throw in some swag. That website is gabehoward.com.
And I'm Dr. Nicole Washington. You can find me on all social media platforms at Dr. Nicole Psych or on my website, drnicolepsych.com.
And we'll see everybody next time on the Inside Bipolar podcast.
You've been listening to Inside Bipolar from Healthline Media and PsychCentral.com. Have feedback for the show? Email us at show@PsychCentral.com. Previous episodes can be found at PsychCentral.com/IBP or on your favorite podcast player. Thank you for listening.